Okay, so we can start for today. Thank you for coming, and good morning and welcome to this European House, which is hosting our event entitled Urban Crossover, Hopes and Fears. You probably know me, most of you. I'm Aleksandra Stupar, and I'm professor at the Faculty of Architecture, University of Belgrade, and as a member of BINA, Belgrade International Architecture Week, I'm going to moderate this session consisting of 3 lectures and a discussion at the end. So this part of BINA program is conducted within the project LINA 2.0, funded by the Creative Europe Initiative. Now a few words about LINA. LINA represents a European platform and a network connecting relevant international institutions and organizations with emerging creatives who work at the intersection of architecture and other fields related to spatial culture. Each year, they select featured fellows. Last year, I think it was like more than 400 entries, and they selected only around 20. And you will have a chance to meet 4, which we invited as BINA. And now I'm going to pronounce their names. I was practicing. So it's Walaa, Hajali. Is it okay? Then Lisa van Heyden, Enno, Pötschke, and Nami, Gradoli, Hiner, actually in Spanish, but she's fixing her presentation, so you're going to meet her a bit later. They were all selected according to their previous work, which was in line with our theme, and the theme was related to these emerging hopes and fears. But this time we wanted them to perceive it from different angle as a trigger for solutions, innovative ideas, addressing different problems occurring in cities. So since November last year, I've been working with them, and they've been working on their proposals, their essays. You can read their essays in the catalog of BINA. I think it's available somewhere, yes. And now you will also have a unique chance to hear them live presenting their research, which is really excellent. I'm sure you're gonna enjoy it. I'm also happy to see all our students, I think mostly from the 2nd year and the 5th year, especially students from my studio, who have been working under the same thematic bubble. And hopefully they will have some questions and their insights at the end of these presentations during discussion. So I would like to introduce our first fellow, Walaa Hajali, who will tell us a few words about herself, like a short introduction, and then we're going to enjoy her talk with the theme Violated Waters, a spatial biography of Barada River. So Walaa, the floor is yours.
Thank you. So I should speak, like my voice is fine here, you know? Yeah, great. So, hi everyone. I would like to share some of my research on water commons in Damascus, titled Violated Waters. And I began this work with the intention of investigating patterns of urban stress and in relation to the river and its surrounding urban fabric. However, it quickly became clear that I couldn't meaningfully research solutions without understanding how the river arrived at its current situation over time. And this shifted my approach. Instead of focusing only on the present day of the like facts or isolated data, I started to read the river as a long-term system by layered environmental, political, and urban transformations. And as part of BINA theme, like of urban crossover, my work specifically navigates the tension between hopes and fears of our modern era by approaching the Barada River as a living subject rather than a resource. First, like about myself, I'm an architect. I studied architecture in Damascus, and then I studied environmental design at UCL in the UK. And I'm currently working in the field between architecture and climate engineering in Stuttgart in Germany. And in my daily work, I work between architecture and climate engineering, where I translate complex data or climatic data into sustainable urban and architectural strategies, mainly in Germany and across Europe. But as a Syrian architect, I'm constantly navigating between two very different realities: the high-performance engineering of the West and the fragile urban realities and ecological realities of my country. And this contrast drives my main interest in the relationship between natural environments and urban infrastructures, and particularly how nature shapes and is shaped by urban systems and social dynamics. And one of my work focuses is water, whether in urban water management or also using water as a mediator in thermal systems. But beyond being a technical element, I began to ask, what does the water reveal about the city? And what transformations does it carry over time? And first of all, I would like to invite you to watch a very short video I filmed last December, capturing an everyday moment of a residential neighborhood in Damascus, in a neighborhood on the river. It's a simple moment, but it offers like a grounded glimpse in what drives my motivation to do this research. Observing similar scenes across the city of Damascus prompted me to further investigate the Barada River, which is the main river in Damascus. And it leads me to the central question of my research, which is how can a river be both a victim of and a witness to the fragile urban realities that flows through the city? And I took inspiration from two main theoretical concepts. First, Rob Nixon and his book about slow violence, where he argues that rather than locating breakdowns in circular events like wars or infrastructural collapses, harm can be understood as the outcome of longer sequences of the ordinary actions. And slow violence is not only understood in temporal terms, but also spatial. And it's embedded in the urban infrastructure that disrupt the ecological systems. And secondly, De Kuyter and his writing about the capsular logic, where he also talks about the kind of like the tendency of the modern era to just focus on creating kind of like an interior or like safe interior and separate the inside from outside. And this could be also understood in creating harm in less visible urban environments, which uncertainty is displaced. And in order to understand how a living system was turned into a corridor of sacrifice, how I called it, the decline of Barada River can be understood or can be read through four main spatial conditions: life, amenity, burden, and sacrifice, where the river was started as commons, and then it turns into service, and from service to exposure, and from exposure to downstream loss. And first, where water was visible, valued, and cared for. At the life phase, historically, Damascus city emerged as an oasis city through a continuous negotiation with its environment. And the Barada River serves as the primary ecological corridors in the city, and it fed by mountain runoff and springs from the Barada Springs Lake, like here in the top of the photo, and it integrates three main landscapes. Like in the top, the Barada Valley, or Wadi we call it, the source and the natural passage. And then like we see the city of Damascus, it also like the dense urban core that is sustained by water, which is surrounded by the hinterlands, agriculture lands, which we call them al-Ghouta. And these kind of like architectural lands that they are very famous for the fertile lands for farming. And beyond its engineering function, the river was often praised by poets like for its cold water, and it holds like a symbolic meaning and also kind of like a deep cultural value for Damascus. And also, like we see here, like in other photos, Barada, also like in the Ottoman Empire, it was also like very famous. Like, and the relationship between Damascus and Barada was not only about drinking water and irrigation, but also Barada was the city refugee for relief. And we can see also, like at Wadi Barada in the upstream, like a culture of recreation took root, and it was shaped by shade and sitting and the public pleasure of water as a presence. And Barada also, in the city center, entered each house in Old Damascus. In the vernacular architecture, like where we see here in the photos, in the vernacular architecture, like the central courtyard fountain was also like kind of like an element of the vernacular architecture in Damascus. And this ornament was not only decoration, but also the destination of a visible network of pipes that allowing the river to be present in each house in Damascus. Downstreams as well, like the Ghouta life was equally bound to Barada flow, and the same channels also sustained Damascus, also fed fields and villages economies in Al-Ghouta. However, beneath this abundance, a quiet transformation was unfolding. The river that once carried life began to carry something else, the weight of surface. We see how we move from this ideal of life into the reality of amenity. And the relationship began to change with the river. We can see this assembly of fragility through the beginning of modern planning imagination under the French mandate of Damascus in the 1930s. That shaped Damascus expansion. And we see here like that the planning, like the new planning by the French engineers rendered the hinterland as site of devoid of culture and one of the pure extraction. And this also shaped how the river was imagined afterwards. And this, like we see also like this kind of, this imagination, it can be read through the concept of environmental Orientalism, which kind of also like here talking about the stereotyping of non-Western regions, environments, while overlooking the bigger responsibilities. And the river in the new plans in the 30s and the 60s was particularly like asked also like to kind of like to behave, and it was by Michel Ecochard. And the main agenda of the main river in the new planning was kind of like security, hygiene, and order. And the river like became an object of modernization that should be cleaned. And this complexity of the continuum of Valley, Old City, and Al-Ghouta was kind of discarded and flattened somehow. And not only the planning of of Damascus, but we can see also like this kind of interventions, especially in the upstream parts and the recreational uses. We see like in the 30s also sign of decline were also like visible, and the danger was named. At the upstream, what begins at modest cafes and recreational uses expanded into extensive land filling of spring basins, and this was caused ecological harm to the river, and these active springs were buried and water was forced to reroute invisibly. And by the late 20s, planning strategies repeatedly deconstructed the historical continuity of this valley, Damascus and Al-Ghouta. And the river here became an object of investment and policy. Amenity is understood as the spatial and political precondition of burden when harm is embedded in governance and infrastructure before it's recognized as a crisis. And later, environmental harm becomes lived and normalized where the river becomes a burden to the city. And we see here, for example, in the city center, the burden intensifies through technocratic improvements, let's say, that reorganize the river as managed corridor. And we see a lot of paving and sealing sections along the main streets in Damascus in the kind of middle class neighborhoods. And here, like the river were just, it's always like these kind of like paving, it was justified as maintenance and control. However, these measures accelerated flow and reduced infiltration of the river. And cleaning here becomes political. It organized surfaces while dismantling the ecological life of the river. And we see also like especially during the Assad, like the Assad era, like since the 1970s in Syria, that this kind of like political control centralized the control over the urban environment, and it kind of degraded the collective stewardship of the shared resources and of the commons and of the public space. So people like felt less kind of like they belong to the city. And we see this like that the consequences was not only like mismanagement, but also the redistribution of the environmental rights. Like who is protected, who is exposed to the harm, and whose losses remain unseen. And this, these burdens were firmly political by the beginning of the Syrian uprising, which began in 2011. Water infrastructure became strategic terrain, and between 2015 and 2017, severe damage was caused to the spring, to the upstream terrain in Damascus. And these areas in Wadi Barada, widely associated with the opposition presence, and became sites for control over water. And by 2017, the residents were forcibly displaced to northern of Syria, to the borders with Turkey. And the outcome was not only a shortage of water, but also like a shift in how water was governed and experienced. And water became as an instrument of siege and bargaining and survival in these lands. Downstream in Al Ghouta, towns were also on the front line of, in opposition to the Al-Assad regime, and the violence was therefore also like intense, and damage to infrastructure and accumulation of rubble further affected the water circulation and maintenance, intensifying the burdens caused by scarcity and contamination. And as a result, water scarcity became deeply connected with the violence itself, intensifying Ghouta's position as the outside, absorbing the city transformed harm. Observing the river in its current condition reveals sacrifice phase, in which is no longer treated as a living system, but merely as to absorb and transport waste. And I would like to share some photos I had in my field visit in last December. But before that, I would like here to also to mention or to highlight the spatial continuation of the river, and to kind of challenge the continuation of the map, because also here, it's important also for me here to challenge the authority of the map as an official representation of urban and ecological systems. So here on the map, we see that the river is one continuous line from Al-Wadi on the top to Al Ghouta, through Damascus to Al Ghouta. However, when I had my visit, the river had varied conditions across these different landscapes, and these representations concealed actually the multiple ecological phases of the river, and it was not the same river somehow for me. And we can see here, for example, upstream in the Barada Valley, the contamination was or became ordinary even long before it became politically visible, because of or due to population growth and the urban expansion, combined with the profit-driven also urbanism, enabled private estates also and businesses to discharge wastewater into the river directly without accountability. And we see also in the residential neighborhoods the absence of adequate sewage, and household wastewater is fed also directly into the river. Even the communities were part of the pollution pathway, even if they live with its consequences. In the city center, across the urban core of Damascus, the ecology becomes infrastructure. And we see here that the water situation was better somehow. It was something kind of like secured with concrete boundaries, while the river is treated in certain spaces as hydraulic inconvenience and hidden under the urban networks. So we see the river here like kind of like paved and sealed within the city itself. However, in the hidden urban infrastructure within the old city, also like we see that harm accumulates through neglect, solid waste, and discharging untreated residential and industrial waste directly into the river. And what we see within the river is a process of spatial marginalizing, like an active disconnection from the city, and along its course, the historical river is no longer integrated into the urban life, but it became like a space of environmental decline. Downstream in Al Ghouta, the Barada River increasingly survives on wastewater and storm runoff rather than a natural like flow. And in dry periods, it becomes like an exposed and contaminated channel. And for me, like how I saw it, it was like kind of like carrying what the city can no longer contain. Agricultural lands is unfortunately also heavily affected as polluted water combines with the intensified farming and fertilizers use, reinforcing the river condition. And we see here, for example, this kind of like scenes of chemical like materials also like kind of like the norm in downstream in Al Ghouta. And in this way, the environmental burden of the city is displayed toward Al Ghouta, which functioned as the outside of the urban system. And the process, actually, like this process is both horizontal and vertical. Like pollution moves downstream and is absorbed also into the soil, creating long-term contamination. And what appears as an urban environmental security is in fact produced through displacement. Maybe we see also like here one of the scenes of the river as a material of sacrifice. Barada manifests multiple urban conditions along its course through Damascus, and it's reflecting the ecological vulnerability and urban governance. And this biography like shows how fear is built and embedded in the logic of urban planning and governance, and how it's like when we prioritize the central security of and at the same time externalizing the risk and neglecting the impact of short-term decisions on the river. But an architecture of care challenged this logic by focusing on the river as a living infrastructure rather than a technical element or resource to use. And care seeks not only maintenance and repair, but also spatial and political practices that prioritize vulnerability and interdependence between the urban and rural areas and the continuity over time. And we see also like now, especially like after the fall of Assad, many initiatives in Damascus about restoring Barada, and many cleaning initiatives also by NGOs and local communities. But repair extends beyond isolated actions, and it's where responsibility can be redistributed across time, and actually like we need to reorient the question from how the city can control environmental instability to how we can live with its challenged but collectively. And also like lastly, while the Barada River in Syria is shaped by specific political pressures, its spatial transformation is far from exceptional. It reflects a broader condition that one can observe also like in Belgrade and across the Balkan region. In this context, like planning culture that has emerged that prioritize control and efficiency over ecological continuity actually like need to be changed, and rivers in some parts also like are not treated as living systems, and they are kind of like just like simplified into urban amenities, like to be used, managed, and disconnected from the wider landscape. And this leads to a condition, how I describe it, like security through harm transfer, actually to the downstream. And as climate pressures increase now, like cities reinforce their course while displacing risk outward, creating what can be understood also like as sacrificed corridors or slow violence in the downstream environments. And in this sense, urban resilience is often achieved at the expenses of the ecological life elsewhere. And to challenge this, we need a spatial approach that resists enclosure and restore continuity, and rethink of urban security as not control, but as a coexistence with the environmental systems. And this is just like some photos I took yesterday from Belgrade. Thank you.
For one or two questions, because we are waiting for Nami to fix her presentation, so we have a bit of time in between. Anyone willing to ask a question?
Examples of successful river revitalization around the world. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you. I think like the main thing is just like to kind of like, there is always kind of like successful planning decisions within the rivers, even like within Barada rivers, but is the main actually like to understand what are the main like contributions to kind of like control the river. But there is always this kind of like strategies that you can do, and especially to acknowledge the ecological system of the river itself. So when we, for example, like pave, or we just like kind of like control the river with concrete, we are like in some parts, so we kind of like accelerating here the like water flow, for example, or also like not allowing for plants also like to grow naturally. So it's always like, also like how I see it, it's always like about the strategy. There is no one like successful example that you can see and you see like, this is the whole like river, because it's always about where also like the harm is distributed, and how to see like also like the river as a continuous like system, not only in the city center or in the upstream landscapes. Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Anyone else?
You can take the mic.
Yeah.
Hi. I was wondering a little bit about the connection between this deep research into the water stream and then the work at Transsolar, how this kind of nurtures each other, or where there's overlapping points.
Yeah. So I usually work in Transsolar mostly like in climate engineering, and we do kind of like technical consulting. And basically, so for example, like when I study water in Transsolar, I do rainwater management, but I don't see, or I don't kind of like assess how the river or how water is is performing. Or let's say, for example, like how to use water, mainly, for example, like for thermal systems, yeah? But it's not about the political and ecological system, and especially like over time. And that's what we lack in the industry. And that's why like I was like, for me, like as an environmental or sustainability consultant, like I already like know a lot about the technical part of water, but when I studied the Barada River as a whole, over time, I was also like here trying to understand the political and the social conditions also that also like connects to the river, which is usually like, especially like in the industry, in the daily work, we don't deal with. Yeah.
Thank you.